firstly, just a bit of an introduction. So since 2015, the Co-operative Party has been campaigning on the BBC. It is a British institution. It is as cherished as our other British institutions like the NHS. And so whether that's growing up watching Blue Peter, whether it's catching the 6 o'clock news, whether it's tuning in for the next episode of Line of Duty every Sunday, the BBC is absolutely part of who we are. And since 2015, the BBC has faced massive cuts, massive changes to its funding and changes to its structure as well. And those cutbacks and those controversial decisions that have been taken, like axing free TV licenses for the over 75s, have all been done without any consultation with viewers or listeners. Now, the Secretary of State, of course, recently announced that the government is going to be freezing the BBC's funding and they're going to look to axe the licence fee. And that could really threaten the future of our, beloved public broadcaster as we currently know it. And the BBC ultimately shouldn't belong to the government of the day. It belongs to us, it belongs to you, it belongs to me, the British public. It should be viewers and listeners who are deciding the future of it, not ministers on a whim or opaque committees. The BBC should be free from political interference by giving licence fee payers the opportunity to have a say in its future. So that hopefully sets a little bit of the scene and the context for this evening's event and allows me to introduce our speakers. So I'm really delighted to be joined this evening by Andrew Pakes and Philippa Childs. Andrew's Deputy General Secretary of Prospect Trade Union and leads on their communications and research. And he's going to be speaking first, and he's going to be followed by Philippa. And she is the head of BECTU, the largest trade union in the BBC. And this is an exceptionally valuable opportunity for us to be able to hear from them, to hear and to understand how it is for members at the moment, their members, at the moment at the BBC, how it feels for them, how they think things are going, where they think things will go next, and their take on the role of the BBC going forward as well. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Andrew firstly.
Brilliant. Have I come off mute? Can someone just wave at me if you can hear me? If you wave again, I can go on mute. It can be, that's always bad, isn't it, to start off saying, can you hear me? But firstly, I'm really delighted to be joining you this evening with Philippa on behalf of Prospect and BECTU. This is a really important issue to us, and it's hopefully going to be a really good opportunity for us collectively to talk a bit about not just the things we all think about the BBC, the common things like the news or Line of Duty, we've heard the big things, but also what it means for jobs, what it means for culture, what it means for our values as a country, and what it means for us as citizens within this country. And I think that is a brilliant dialogue which brings together the Co-operative Party's long-standing belief in people-powered services and public service value, together with the values we have as a trade union, which is about doing the best for our members, because our members at their best do the best for the country. In terms of excellent employers are often the best providers of good products and services. And in the case of this, good quality public sector broadcasting is in our DNA as a union, and Philippa will talk more about that. So, we're talking about the BBC this evening, and I think we've got a rough few years, and we need to have cooperators, trade unionists and campaigners from all sorts of traditions making the case in your families and your communities and different places about the value of this great institution. But it's also part of a wider backdrop of valuing public service in general. We know that the government is seeking to privatise Channel 4, which has brought about huge value, not just in terms of public service ethos, but in terms of diversity, in terms of commissioning different types of people and different types of programmes, to broadcast to the nation. And that links very much with the BBC in terms of how we can shape something. So I think neither Philippa and I would sit here and say everything is perfect, but the alternative to what we have now is a lot worse. So for me, it's a really good opportunity to join some old friends I can see on this call and some new cooperators in terms of sharing that conversation. I come very much from a mutual cooperative tradition. I think it's the values I have as a cooperator took me into the trade union movement, because I could see that mutual aid, people coming together and having agency to solve and build solutions for themselves, is what makes my value set important, whether it's at work, or whether it's in our community, and in all the wonderful other things our international cooperative ideal brings to us. And that really brings it into focus in something like the BBC. As Emma said at the beginning, nearly all of us use the BBC every single week, and many people don't even realise it, whether it is big things like watching Strictly or watching the big dramas on a Sunday evening together, or it's listening to the sports results, or it's tuning into local radio stations, or it's finding out the weather from your app on your phone, or if it's meeting a neighbour in the pub who is part of our creative industries, who may well have been trained or supported or had their career built through the impetus the BBC provides to the whole of the creative industries in many more parts of the country than it used to. And it's only spreading its wings in a real sense of what levelling up could be about because of the role of trade unions and the staff and the workforce in the BBC making that case for something better and something different. So Prospect is really proud to have BECTU as one of its sectors. We're a family of a union, with BECTU being one of our really important areas across film, TV, theatre and the creative industries. We're an independent, proud trade union. We share lots of values with the cooperative movement. So from my perspective, this is the start of a conversation to see how we can bring your People's BBC campaign and our Workforce BBC campaign together, because we know at this precise moment in time, there are people in government who want to do bad by the values we hold. But we also know it will take a Herculean effort for us to bring a coalition together to set out something more positive about that. And that will rely on us, you, and our friends and colleagues across the cooperative and labour movement working together. So I've been your warm-up act, and I think I've warmed up enough, I think. So I'm going to hand you to Philippa, who's our real expert and champion on all things to do with quality public servicing and the BBC. Philippa.
Thank you, Andrew. What a build-up. As we've already discussed, so BECTU is one of, I was about to say one of two, but actually one of three unions who operate in the BBC. There's the NUJ, who largely represent, as you might imagine, journalists working at the BBC. There are a small number of Unite members, but BECTU, we basically represent everyone else who's not a journalist or not involved in newsmaking. So, and we, as you might imagine, as with all employers, we like to think of ourselves as a critical friend, but supportive in relation to what the BBC wants to achieve. And of course, there are going to be times when we strongly disagree with them, when we have rows with them. And I'm certainly not suggesting that everything is perfect at the BBC. You know, we've had our own criticisms around some of the ways that editorial policy has impinged on some equalities issues that our members are involved in and want to campaign on. So, and like probably everybody on this call at various points, I've shouted at the news in the evening when it's, misrepresenting something or representing a point of view that I don't agree with. But I think the important thing about this debate is that we have to put aside those criticisms, recognise that the BBC is so much more than news, and that it is really crucial to UK PLC, quite frankly, and for many, many reasons. And, for our members who actually work at the BBC, I think it's really important, because I think they've felt at times quite demoralised by some of the attacks on the BBC over the years. And part of what we want to do in this campaign is to make them feel better, actually make them feel good about the work that they do, and that it is appreciated by the country. So, and as well as the people who are actually employed by the BBC, we shouldn't forget that many thousands of freelancers also rely on their livelihoods by making programmes for the BBC, and BECTU represents those too. So the BBC is hugely important to us. Public service broadcasting is hugely important to us. And I think we have to recognise that the the challenge that was laid down by Nadine Dorries is not something that is going to disappear. There is a debate now about how the BBC is funded in the future, and we think everyone who is progressive and supportive of public service broadcasting needs to, you know, stand up and be counted at this point. And I just want to run through a few things that we are wanting to highlight in relation to the unique role of the BBC, and you'll know many of these anyway, but you know, the government have got quite short memories, haven't they, really, when you think about the fact that the BBC became the UK's largest classroom during COVID, helping parents to become teachers overnight. And we know that 67% of primary school students used bite-sized education resources during lockdown. 72% of secondary school students used the resources. 80% said the materials helped improve their understanding of their subject matter. And 2.7 million unique visitors each week kept their education on track using BBC Bitesize. And of course, the BBC, as we've already discussed, promotes global Britain. The BBC is the envy of the world and promotes British values abroad. So in a world of fake news and disinformation, the BBC is an essential soft power asset for the country, providing accurate, reliable news to a global audience of 3.319 million every week. And former UN General Secretary Kofi Annan said, the World Service, I noticed somebody commented about not forgetting the World Service. The World Service is Britain's greatest gift to the world this century. So what does it really say about this government's ambition for global Britain to endanger this hugely important and unique service? And of course, the BBC brings the nation together. Most people tuned in to the BBC for their pandemic updates, with their local presence providing essential public health updates during an unparalleled crisis. The top 10 watched moments on TV of all time were all on the BBC. 34.6 million people tune in each week to BBC Radio live programming, and the BBC have been opening new local radio stations to serve local audiences, recognising that their coverage across the UK was not consistent. So they've really been putting a lot of effort into doing that. The BBC provides 10 TV services, BBC iPlayer, 10 UK radio stations, over 40 nations and local radio stations, BBC Sounds, and one of the UK's most popular websites, broadcasting from across the country, and all for just 43p per day. Really importantly for us, the BBC creates jobs, regenerates our cities, and drives innovation across the country. So 50% of jobs in the BBC are based outside of London, over 10,000 jobs. It's a key part of building the Northern Powerhouse. In Salford, 2,600 jobs in the BBC and 3,800 supported in the wider creative sector, accounting for 40% of creative jobs in the area. And the BBC contributes a gross value add of 4.9 billion to the national economy spread across Britain's regions. In Cardiff alone, the BBC has added 1.1 billion GVA economic value to the local economy and 1,900 jobs. And it's playing an essential part in making the British creative sector the best in the world by investing in future talent. By 2025, the BBC expects to employ 1,000 apprentices as part of its 1 million investment in skills and training over the next 4 years. And that is really crucial, because I'm sure if you haven't heard about it, you will soon, about the skill shortage in the creative industries. And the BBC is so important in what it offers, the way it supports the freelance workforce, as I've said previously. And of course, freezing the licence fee will cost the BBC 285 million a year, which comes on top of, as Emma said earlier, 1 billion of savings per annum of savings already made. And this will necessitate huge cuts, hitting jobs, regional economies, and ultimately the content that British people know and love. So we think Obviously, we think that freezing the licence fee is a mistake. We think the BBC should be properly funded. And we've been around the buoy and thinking about how, is there a perfect solution for how the BBC should be funded that maintains its independence and that makes it viable in terms of going forward and planning for the future. And the reality is that the options that have been presented are, there aren't very many of them, and we think that none of them are particularly effective. So you could turn to advertising, and given the audience figures, the BBC no doubt would suck up all of the anybody who wanted to do any advertising that wanted a big audience. The BBC would suck advertising revenue from ITV and Channel 4 and so on. So we don't think that's a good solution. To compare it with streamers just doesn't make sense for all the reasons I've just described, because the BBC provides so much more. So as I say, we've talked about, no one's suggesting for a minute that the license fee is necessarily perfect in all respects, and obviously we campaigned against the government's decision to hand over the over 75's license fee decision to the BBC. We think that should be a government decision and a government cost. But nevertheless, as I said earlier, I think we think at 43p a day, the BBC is well worth it, and that any attempts to change that model really will put all of that I've already talked about at risk. So I was going to leave it there, Emma, if that's okay. I'm keen, obviously, to hear people's questions and thoughts.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much for your contributions at this point. I think there's some really interesting points which have been raised there. I really liked, obviously, what Andrew was saying about the journey actually of mutualism to trade unionism, actually, and how he's ended up in the space that he has with Prospect Union. And I think similarly, Philippa, the overview that you've just given there of kind of the benefits which the BBC gives us, some of which, as you say, are realised every day and are kind of, and are obvious to us, but some of it actually goes, beyond those, just the TV programmes that you might watch at 6 o'clock every night or whatever. It goes much further than that into our communities and much more broadly into our agenda. So as you say, we've already had a couple of questions come in, so I'll go to them. I'll probably I'll do 3 to start off with, and then we'll kind of see how they come in beyond that as to whether we group them or whether we do them more individually. So the first one that I've had, Philippa and Andrew, is do you think that the BBC board should be publicly appointed? And that comes from Mohammed. We've had a second one from Susie, who's asked kind of about the campaigns within the trade union around this, and as to what kind of your plans are, and is there particular activity that you've got over kind of the coming weeks and months to be involved in. And then I can see we've got a hand up from Helen, so we'll come to Helen as well to complete the 3, and then we'll come to you both at that point. Helen.
Yeah, I want to know why the BBC felt that it was necessary to make every person over the age of 75 liable for a TV licence, considering most of us have retired and are on a much reduced income.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Helen. And so I'll come to Andrew to start with, and then go to Philippa.
Okay, we can cox and box between us. You can tell difficulty with doing these events when you're sat in different rooms to your colleagues. You can't get to do passing bits of paper on the table to say who's going to answer which question. I'll take Helen's question, if I may, first. And really, I think we've got to be really careful, Helen. I know it can be really, really difficult what's happened, but we've got to pin the tail on the right donkey. And the reason why the over 75s was cut is because of a government decision. The government passed that responsibility onto the BBC without giving the BBC the money to do it. So if the government had passed the money, the price tag of that to the BBC, it could have done it. But without the money, it was an unfunded commitment they passed on to it. And we need to be really clear about that. I don't think anyone at the BBC wanted to do that, but the reality of the impact of it. And this is what we face, isn't it, on these, it's not quite fake news, but it's manipulated information around. This is precisely what the government wanted. They wanted to make a cutback and make it look like someone else to blame for it. We've seen them do exactly the same to councils. When councils have had their funding cut, or local authorities through schools have had their funding cut, and then schools have to make the unpalatable decisions, or councils have to make the unpalatable decisions. So this was a national decision by government, and the government decision of that, of the government of the day, was to penalise pensioners and those aged over 75. And that's why we've said, we campaigned hard as Prospect and BECTU and the TUC as a whole, say that was a wrong decision. It was short-sighted in terms of it creates division in our communities, but also wrong because I know it penalises people who do struggle on some of those areas of how they do that. In terms of the question around public appointments, I think, I say this and Philippa grimaces, I'll shut up. I think to some extent we're relatively relaxed. Our main goal is to protect the BBC and to protect its funding base so that it's sustainable and can live and breathe in the communities and areas it can do. Is there a secondary question of how do we improve its accountability? I think we're really open to looking at that. That could be through different viewers panels. It could be for other engagements. One of the little known parts of the BBC is that actually it has a commitment on religious broadcasting and on rural broadcasting, things that no commercial player has done. Could that be extended to create commitments within its charter and others to look after different areas of our, of our common life and others? So there's a bit of a space there to think about what do we do with it in the future. But anything that reduces it to a rump of what it is, whoever you appoint will be managing decline. And I think we're in the business of trying to save what we've got and have a national conversation about how we make it even better.
Brilliant, thank you, Andrew. Philippa?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I was going to argue for one change in terms of the BBC board, it probably would be for some sort of worker participation. We do have that in some other public bodies where there is someone from the trade unions who sits on the board and therefore is obviously able to represent the voice of the workforce. I mean, I agree with Andrew, we are relatively relaxed. I'm just not sure there's a perfect scenario in terms of, because obviously government appointments are, potentially problematic. We've seen that, but equally, I've heard people argue for the election of the BBC board, and that, to my mind, is equally potentially problematic. So yeah, I think if I was to argue for one thing, it definitely would be for a worker voice on the BBC board. I think Andrew's covered the issue of the over 75s. It was a government decision. It wasn't something the BBC wanted to do, but the reality is that that would have meant further cuts if they had left the free license fees in the way that they were. Then they would have faced further, many millions more of cuts, and it just wasn't tenable. So, but we and many others have argued, that actually that is something that the government should take on board.
Brilliant, thank you both. There's questions coming in fairly thick and fast now, so if there are things that anyone would like to contribute or would like to share their views on or would like to hear from the panel on, then I'd ask you to either put your hand up or to put your messages in the chat, and we hope to come to as many people as possible, which takes us on to the next round of questions. The first one is from Geeta. So Geeta puts forward the question of, do we think that this is an existential threat to the BBC, or is this an attrition? We've then got an additional one from Ryan, who touches on something which I think you mentioned a bit, Philippa, around subscription fees instead of a tax, and whether that would be an appropriate funding model. And then we've also got a hand up from Martin. So Martin, if we can come to you.
Hi. Yes. Sorry, I was just trying to unmute myself. I mean, I spent nearly 30 years working for the BBC, and I'm sure I'm not the only one on this panel who was, I mean, on this discussion who was in that position. So, I mean, I know what it's like. And I mean, the BBC is really unique in a sense, not just in being an organization which speaks, with and for the British people, but also has gone out of its way to, promote people of color, so that it's to bring different voices to the screen, and to promote gay people and women. And anyone who's been in the organization will know that this is absolutely been going on for nearly 20 years now, and you can see it on the screen every single day. But I think one of the things that we have to really be aware of is that this is not just an attempt to cut the BBC down to size, but to move towards the American model, where you basically have a sort of Fox News on the one hand and CNN on the other, the most divisive situation, where there is no central ground in British broadcasting. And this is why it's so vitally important to fight for it. One of the things that one of the organizations which have been doing amazing work and very quietly is Voice of the Listener. And I wonder whether the Co-op can't work with them, because they are well respected and they're very shrewd in the way in which they actually fight.
Absolutely. Sorry.
So no, not at all. I was just coming off mute to thank Martin for his contribution, and then I was actually going to come to you, Philippa. So we're seamless there.
Yeah. I was going to agree with Martin about the voice of is it listener and viewer, or the other way around? Anyway, they are a great campaigning organisation that we work with also, and we will be working very closely with them on this campaign. But yeah, in answer to the questions, I mean, I think I touched on it a little bit before. The problem with this subscription is that people will then only pay for the things that they want to watch. So the broad range of the things that the BBC does, like from songs of praise through to Country File and Winter Watch and all of those wonderful programs, Antique Roadshow, they're not, I don't watch all of them, they're not all my cup of tea, but I think it's important to remember the broad range of what the BBC offers, and you simply would not get that on Netflix or an Amazon, and that's why we think it's really important to protect the diversity of programming, and audience numbers obviously are important, and as I've said before, you look at the big dramas that the BBC produces, they are always top of the rankings in terms of audience numbers. But I think there's something else as well. If you think about children's programming, you simply would not get that on a subscription service, or if you did, the chances are it would be very Americanized in a lots of kids talking in American accents. And really, do we want that for our children, or do we want British programming and stuff which is culturally close to us as a country? So I think that's the biggest argument against subscription payment for the BBC. And the other question was about, I can't actually remember. Is it an existential threat? Yeah, yes. I mean, I think the BBC does face an existential threat, and it faces it sadly in its centenary year. So this is the BBC centenary year, and if you think about how much the BBC has changed over that time, I absolutely agree with much of what has been said about why the BBC is so important. I'm not by any stretch of the imagination saying that it doesn't make mistakes. It does, and there are things about it that I would change. But I just think because it's facing an existential threat, internally, of course, we'll continue to criticise those things that we find problematic. Actually, I think it could do much more on diversity. It needs to do much more on diversity. We've said that very publicly, but because we think it's facing an existential threat, I suppose what I'm saying is, you know, put aside your criticisms about specific programming or the news, or, you know, things that the BBC could do better, because the principle of public service broadcasting and the BBC itself is worth defending, and we can make that change so long as the BBC is still there, but we need to campaign for it now, because I think you know, we've seen what this government, the agenda that this government, I think today Oliver Dowden was again on talking about the woke agenda and all of those sorts of things. So there is a real public service organisations which should be protected are coming under attack from this government.
Thank you. Andrew, I think Philippa has pretty much covered all of those questions there, but if I'll give you an opportunity to come in if there was anything that you wanted to add.
Yeah, I'd just add, yeah, I think I'll pick up on, I think it is an absolute existential threat. And you know, the dangerous thin ice we walk on in the months ahead is that we have a government and a right-wing paper-based media that will seek to divide and rule us. You know, in some ways, the BBC encompasses so much of what, you know, what happens around us. We can always pick something, whether it's a news item or a program or decision it's made. And the opponents of public sector broadcast, public service broadcast, will seek to exploit that, and will seek to push that campaign, push that through. And you know, we've been reflecting, think about the campaigns. I've seen some of the questions come, how we can work together. We will definitely be stepping up our campaign and talking about the fact that BBC is more than a license. I think one area it'd be interesting to think about is, you know, I think the fact we call it a TV license makes people think of TV, and actually perhaps we should, whatever the mechanism is, word it differently, because when you think TV, you don't even think of radio, let alone all the other services it provides. But the risk is, and we've really thought about this hard, haven't we, Philippa, with members and with other officers in the union. The license fee is the least worst option out there, is what it comes down to, because all the other alternatives will create damage and division beyond that. You know, you could put it into national government funding. If you put it under national government funding, you reduce the independence, and another government can just slash it in terms of a department. If you put it into subscription, people will just pay for the flagship shows. And how does that pay for radio? How does that pay for, you know, not just having programs brought from America, but actually having film crews based in different parts of the UK and the devolved nations? If it's advertising, Philippa talked about that. Advertising will just take money from other broadcasters. It won't put more money into the system. Some people have said, make it like the council tax, and it's a local government. I think that risks diluting it. So genuinely, if there was a magical funding model out there that people could come up with, then I think we could look at it. But from our perspective, given the cost of what it is, the license fee doesn't have to be loved, but it's most probably the best option out there in terms of protecting all the things we've been talking about this evening.
Thank you so much. There's there's quite a few comments which are coming in now. They're coming thick and fast with people's different ideas and different queries about whether it's models of funding, or whether it's different ways in which kind of we as cooperators can be more involved in the campaign, or also kind of ideas that we can put forward as to how we can be better involved in the BBC and create that increased transparency that we've talked about. We've got probably time for one more round of questions, and then what we'll do is we'll wrap up and we'll talk about kind of next steps, whether that's next steps with our campaign, or whether that's next steps with what yourselves are planning in this area as well. So first of all, we've got Duncan with his hand up.
It's to ask the question that people have been requesting, because someone's come on to say, what is our response to Duncan McGibbon's question? Mine was one of the very first questions asked, and that is that basically we are dealing with an organisation that has been found to be racist, an organisation that has been found in many ways to be elitist. Recent statistics on the number of middle-class people holding down arts jobs reveal the fact that in fact the situation is worse now than it was in the 80s and 90s. My question is, surely we must challenge Nadine Dorries with an alternative vision of the BBC that really does seek radically to reform these failures in a broadcasting organisation. Things are not good. Things are not as pleasant or as acceptable as possibly people are making it out to be.
Thanks for that question, Duncan. And just to say, we have had more questions than we're going to have time to get round to. So I appreciate there might be a little bit of frustration in that, but that's just the nature of an event where people have got lots of passionate views about the future of such an important institution within our country. So a couple of other questions that we've had to take within this round. So for example, we have had a couple of others continuing around the commercial angle, which I feel like we've covered already with the responses in particular, which Philippa has given. About why she feels that model isn't particularly appropriate. Another question that we've had is from Caroline. Caroline's put in a couple of contributions in which she's mentioned the voice of the listener and feeling that that's a really helpful and really useful way to engage in this area and to work with them where they're doing a lot of positive action. But her suggestion, and I think this has been brought up by a couple of others, is that perhaps we need to, and again builds on what Andrew was saying really, is that we need to kind of almost build a narrative which isn't just about, you know, funding or a TV license, that it kind of expresses that there's a much broader social impact to this, to the BBC, and a social value that's created in an investment actually in our communities and in our arts sector, which kind of goes much further than what the idea of a TV license or BBC funding captures. So it'd be good to be able to hear your thoughts on that. And then finally is just around where the campaign goes next. So I'll just briefly say before coming to yourselves for answers to those questions and those kind of next step comments, is that the action which we put out to our co-op members, we had nearly 20,000 signatures on our petition, which was obviously only launched several weeks ago. It's one of the highest responses that we've ever had in such a short time, which I think really does show again that passion and that the strength of feeling that comes when it comes to our public broadcaster. And it's just to say that in terms of next steps, for one is that I'm going to ask my colleague to share that petition within our chat function at the moment, so that if you haven't put your name to it already, whether you can add your name to it. Similarly, if you can share it through your own networks, whether that's on social media, whether that's on WhatsApp with your local family, whether that's, sorry, not your family, your local community, whoever that might be, so that they can also have eyes on it. And then also to say that following on from this evening's session is we're going to be contacting everyone here with details of how they can write to their local MP to let them know how they feel about the BBC and what should happen in terms of a people's BBC, which I think again just touches on another of the questions which said, you know, well, what's the feeling in the House of Commons about this? Well, let's make sure that those in the House of Commons know how we feel about this actually when it comes to taking decisions on our institutions. So I'll come to Andrew first, and then I'll come to Philippa for final remarks. Andrew?
Yeah, I think they're really good questions. I really like the idea of social value and how we talk about this as in investing both in services, but the things we value, you know, as a set of communities. I think that's a really good way and a good challenge to stop talking about the price and the funding and talk about how it can deliver and how it can get better. So I don't think anyone here would sit here and say that, you know, we've said through this, BBC is not perfect. You know, bit by bit, we are beginning to, you know, make changes with things like the huge investment in apprentices has come about through the pressure by trade unions and the BBC and others saying it needs to do better in terms of diversifying and bringing in opportunities for people outside of London and from different educational and social backgrounds to get into that. Clearly, the BBC is so big that is hard to fix, but it's better to have a BBC you can fix than allow us to go down some of the, you know, dystopian things that have come up in the chat box and others about this being, you know, a balkanized media that becomes more, you know, that gives more power to GB News and some of the big global media players, as opposed to, you know, our BBC. And I think next steps of the campaign are, we will be working on it, and Philippa can talk about that. But I think there's a great space there. If we can talk about, in defending the BBC, why it matters to us, what has mattered to us in the past, but that we need to move the ... on to what should it be in the future. I think that opens up all sorts of brilliant conversations about some of the mutual ideas that have come up in the chat box from John and others. There's some of the things that have come up from different people who put things in. What do we want it to be? You know, but if it doesn't exist, it won't be any of those things. So in saving it, I think we have to appeal to people's values, and that has to be a conversation about what do we want the future to look like. This is our BBC. We're going to defend it, and in defending it, we're going to set a higher standard for how it can be better and be the best BBC and our best BBC. Philippa.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to respond to Duncan directly, because I agree with very much of what you said, Duncan. So the BBC definitely could be more diverse. It's made some terrible decisions at various points. We've had to write to Tim Davies' predecessor about the whole row around Naga Munchetty describing Trump as being racist. We've had to write to Tim Davie about something that got into the public domain about reasons why, you know, an individual who was a high-profile anti-racist campaigner wasn't appointed to a post. So I think there are many problems to the BBC. I think they do recognise they've got a diversity problem. So Tim Davie has set some targets for his managers, but even that, I'm not sure whether that's going to completely solve the problem, because I think they have to be, I think there has to be more diversity in really key positions where decisions are made. So if any of you picked up the David Olusoga McTaggart lecture a couple of years ago, he talked about leaving the BBC because he felt that the culture within the organisation didn't welcome him and others of colour. And so I think that is a real challenge for the BBC, and it's something we'll continue to campaign on. And as Andrew says, I think this is really about making the BBC that we want it to be, recognising that it's made mistakes and it will continue to make mistakes, and that it needs to do things better and become more diverse and welcome people from all socioeconomic backgrounds. But nevertheless, despite all of that, I would still say it is a really valuable asset, and what we need to try and do is to campaign to make it the people's BBC, and really reflective of our society in 2022 and beyond.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. Just to say a huge thank you to our speakers, Philippa and Andrew, for sharing your insights and experience of the work that you're doing in this area already. It's brilliant to be able to hear from you and just to get that additional information as to how it feels from your experiences and your members' experiences, as well as we look to where we go next with the campaign. And also to thank everyone on the call today for sharing your insights. That the chat has been a buzz with ideas and input, which is a really fantastic thing. I'm sorry I've not been able to necessarily get around to everyone, but I assure you I'll be reading all of the comments. And just to confirm again that we will follow up today's meeting. I saw someone mention in the chat to make sure we share the petition again as well, just so that it doesn't get lost kind of when the Zoom call ends. That's no problem. We'll make sure to share that so that you've got the tools to be able to, as I say, share with your networks far and wide as well, so that we can continue to campaign on this vital issue to protect our broadcaster and have a people's BBC. So thank you all so much. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evenings and look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye now.
Thank you.